Hot monogamy. Is it possible? In the last post, I wrote about sexual health, what they don't tell you about protecting it, where I gave some unconventional advice about preventing and, in some cases, possibly curing sexually transmitted diseases, STDs. Taking the conversation one step further from the physical and into the mental and spiritual, let's consider the mind-body-spirit connection of sexuality in our lives in its highest expression. In our quest to find happily ever after, early on in life, we find ourselves met with many challenges. Knowing when enough partners is enough partners, learning what our emotional needs are and how to meet them, along with others, and valuing sex for more than the physical benefits it brings. Somehow, along the way, what starts as an idealistic adventure to find the one gets met with some sober reality checks. I see this all the time with younger couples who are quick to fall in love, only months later to discover that the person they imagined themselves to have met was in reality someone entirely different, if not an outright mismatch. How did they miss this in the early stages or early phases of the relationship? How did they not see that this person wasn't the one they glamorized them to be? My guess? They were looking for the person they wanted to see, rather than looking to see the other person as they really are. Maybe what they fell in love with was someone's potential, as opposed to who that person chooses to be. The good news about these disappointments in love is that you learn, and boy do you learn, to look beneath the surface of attraction. You learn not to confuse attention for intention, or intensity for intimacy. The lessons are plain as day, yet some of us are seemingly blinded by the light of the truth, so we struggle to find more meaningful relationships. This is likely because reality doesn't quite mesh with our ideals of love, now does it? And the longer we resist reality, the more real love seems to evade us. Before we get into how to get that deeper meaning in our relationships, our sexual relationships that is, through real love, intimacy, and sacred sexuality, let's first consider the common pitfalls in partnering: cheating and fear of commitment. Why people cheat? We're now living in an age where polyamory and open relationships have become trendy in some circles. Don't be fooled, folks. This is old news. Nothing new going on over here. I mean, you can read about this in the Bible, for Christ's sake. Historically, these arrangements never ended well. Someone always got outed. Someone always ended up feeling like the third wheel and left shafted. And if that's not enough to convince you, well, watch a few episodes of Sister Wives on TLC. Why haven't people evolved from these kind of relationships? Granted, most of you need no further convincing. What's more of an issue is more common forms of infidelity, and this can be through sex outside of a commitment, emotional affairs, and even porn addictions. Why do so many of us struggle with these things? As I mentioned on my channel not long ago, there was a time early in my 20-year marriage when I didn't understand cheaters. I'd naively think, why can't people just love the one they're with? And then God showed me, unfortunately, and through this, I learned some compassion for those who cheat. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I condone infidelity. I am merely saying that I have compassion for those struggling with the circumstances which lead to it. Divided loyalties bring divided hearts. Consider, for example, people who have family and finances which tie them to a loveless marriage. Let's say the husband is a porn addict, and try as they might to help him, every night he turns to the computer or a virtual relationship for sex, leaving his sex-starved wife alone in bed. Why? Because he's selfish, lazy, and has no intention of changing. Worse, there's absolutely nothing she can do to fix it. They've tried counseling to no avail, because the fact of the matter is that he's so far gone in his addiction that he cannot even perform in bed anymore with a real woman. Or consider, for example, a man whose wife runs up credit card bills, neglects the home, and even routinely refuses him sexual favors because It's about her and what she wants. She has no intention or motivation whatsoever to change. What's someone in these circumstances to do? Whatever you suggest, there will be no easy answers, because what's really going on here isn't just about sex. It's about having unmet emotional needs and partnering with people who can't or won't meet them. In which case, someone's got to have the courage to honorably end a relationship they know is empty or dead. Yet all too often, they're overcome by fears and insecurities, or overburdened by duties and responsibilities which derail the act of bowing out respectfully. In my experience, by the time someone actually cheats in a relationship, it was already over. They already mentally checked out of the relationship long before the actual adultery occurred. They're just looking for Mr. or Miss Next, so they don't have to face being alone when they finally leave that relationship. Or alternatively, they're looking for someone to fill a void left unfulfilled in a relationship that they have no intention of ever leaving. Either way, they're trying to solve a problem of unmet emotional needs through another person, without ever addressing why their choices of partners have brought them to this crossroads in the first place. Unfortunately, cheating often leaves the root problem unaddressed and further complicated. It goes from what could have been a healthy conversation about each person's needs and what both are willing to do to meet them, to an unhealthy one that revolves around slut shaming or man whoring condemnation. Perhaps we miss the chance at healthier conversations because we don't really know what those needs are, much less how to communicate them. Or we have, only to discover that we really don't share values with them after having mistakenly overinvested in this relationship. For these reasons, it's just easier to find solace in another person or thing. It's just easier to start a relationship with someone new than to work on the relationship we have with ourselves and another. And maybe that's for the best if this partner is unwilling to match effort and share sacrifice. But at what point do we say enough is enough in the search for a new partner? How many partners is too many? What is promiscuity? I ask this half seriously because it seems like everyone has a different definition. Some define promiscuity as a lack of sexual discernment and discrimination. But what actually constitutes promiscuous behavior? I also ask this half seriously because, like the first question, this too seems to have a different definition depending on who you're talking to. And I find it peculiar that some of the most promiscuous people I've known never seem to see themselves as such. Argue with them as much as you like about your standards versus theirs, and they remain unconvinced that there's anything indiscriminate or undiscerning about their sexual misadventures. So forget about what I believe or what you believe constitutes promiscuity. Let's consider what research finds. 5% of women have had 16 or more partners. 5% of men have had 50 or more. 1% of American women have had over 35 partners. The comparable figure for men is 150, according to Nick Wolfinger. In his article, Wolfinger explains that the median American woman has had 3 sexual partners in her life, whereas the median American man has had 5. And these numbers haven't changed much over the last few decades, following the sexual revolution of the 1960s. So most people alive today have had few sexual partners, and only a few have had a lot. What is a lot? More than 15 sexual partners in your lifetime, according to the research. What do sexually adventurous people, whom some would consider promiscuous, have in common? They are less likely to be married and more likely to be divorced. They are 7 times more likely to have cheated on a spouse than their less adventurous peers. They're more likely to be political liberals than moderates or conservatives. They're likely to be less religious in beliefs with little or no participation in religious activities. They're more likely to have a postgraduate degree possessing higher education and intelligence. And they're less likely to report being very happy, more likely to report not too happy, especially women. Now, I shared all that to say this. Demonstrating sexual discernment is not about morality for the sake of morality or practicing tradition for the sake of tradition. This is not about conformity to any doctrine or dogma. This is about honoring tried and true practices, ageless, timeless truths, which support happiness and wholeness in life. It's about finding sexual freedom through sexual boundaries, which actually make that possible. As obvious as this may seem to you and I, because we account for the majority, it isn't quite so obvious for others. To them, sexual freedom is about being free from sexual limitations. In other words, they see more sexual boundaries as less sexual freedom. As a result, they end up with health and relationship problems which scream out that the truth is to the contrary. Sadly, some of these people don't figure it out until too late in life, after they've left a wake of broken hearts and shattered dreams. And even when they do figure it out, many still don't know how to integrate the lesson into everyday life. Take, for example, a woman I once knew who had slept with over 100 men by her mid-40s. Much like the statistics, she too was highly educated and intelligent, didn't have any religious beliefs, and was a political liberal. After finding herself regretfully unmarried and childless by age 40, she saw the error of her ways and had a change of heart. Unfortunately, she went to the other extreme, abstinence. This only brought more loneliness and unhappiness, but for different reasons than before. My advice: surrender extremes, create boundaries for growth. Something I've noticed among people like this is that they balk at the notion that there's a spiritual and emotional value to sex. It's all physical to them, whether they're at the extreme of promiscuity or abstinence. And in my estimation, that's where they miss it. That's why they never find middle ground by integrating a healthy respect for sex as something more than animalistic or primal urges. And we have enough people who think like this, hence the reason why sex has become cheapened and oversimplified in society. Let's redefine sexual freedom, shall we? The search for sexual freedom is, in my opinion, to be found in committed unions where emotional openness is practiced and sex is regarded as something sacred. Anything less will leave you feeling empty, forever chasing after the next ever fleeting high, or worse, divorced and diseased. People crave intimacy, but they often confuse sex with intimacy. That's why no matter how much or how little sex they have, it only satisfies them for so long before they're longing for something or someone else. When we use sex or abstinence as a cure-all to fill the real void, which is intimacy, then we're forever coming up short, feeling like something's missing, because it is. Granted, lack of intimacy might be subconsciously motivated by a fear of intimacy or rejection. Still, that doesn't change the fact that the physical sex alone will never heal this emotional wound. It will only create more wounds to heal. Choose wisely: sexual freedom through commitment or the lack of it. Factually speaking, the idea that sexual freedom is sex without limits is a lie. All sex comes with some kind of limits. You just have to choose which limits you're willing to accept and why. People fall for this lie because they're running from emotional honesty. They're avoiding uncomfortable truths. Yet the more they run, the more their fears chase them down and confront them. That's clear from the research I mentioned earlier, demonstrating that sexually adventurous, promiscuous types of people find that their fun times take them to a not-so-happy place. If most people are being honest with themselves, they want a life partner. Yes, even the commitment phobes. If they're really being honest with themselves, they're not actually afraid of love, someone who takes their best interests as their own. No, they're afraid of losing themselves and what they value to someone who doesn't take their best interests as their own. People who behave as if they don't value connection and commitment, who have an avoidant attachment style, are often being driven by underlying unresolved fears. They believe that by avoiding monogamy, they're avoiding pain and pressure. But if you've read this far, if you've listened this far, then you know that the opposite is true. They're actually attracting pain and pressure into their lives. So to me, the real sexual freedom is having a relationship where you're free to love your partner without those limits. Whenever we create an atmosphere of inhibition and mistrust, then sexual freedom is infringed. Conversely, when we create an environment safe for and encouraging of emotional vulnerability, then sexual freedom is allowed. It's from this place of freedom that we can heal our deepest unmet needs. These unmet needs may rise to the surface, for example, through insecurities that show a need for more acceptance and belonging. But by recognizing these shadow aspects in each other and responding with unhindered connection, we make way for shamelessly raw sex, which has tremendous healing power. What's easier than the hard way? For whatever it's worth, I believe that infidelity and indiscriminate sex serve as ways that people learn the hard way about relationships. It's through these trials and errors that we figure out our emotional needs and values. We learn what we can and can't compromise. And we learn what we're willing to sacrifice and risk, and for what benefit. The easier route, in my opinion, is to take the time to know and accept your needs without fear or guilt. Relationships aren't so complicated when we know what the deal breakers are for us in partnerships and have a willingness to recognize and release prospects who can't or won't seal the deal for us. I'm not saying this is going to be easy. No, can be downright disappointing. But it's far less painful when you come to a place of self-knowing and self-loving. It's far less painful if you want them, but you don't need them to be something they aren't in order for you to feel good about yourself and your life. And you don't need the relationship to become something it'll never be. When you arrive at this place of clarity and confidence within yourself, you'll have a better chance of uniting with someone who cares for conscious connection, sacred sexuality, as much as you. So, is hot monogamy possible? Well, based upon what I've shared with you, I'd say that hot monogamy isn't impossible, but it's been made improbable in most cases, given the fact that most people don't do the self-awareness and emotional healing work that's necessary. For this reason, you'll find people going from relationship to relationship, trying to find themselves and the one, sometimes learning, but often the hard way. And there really is an easier way, free of unnecessary pain and suffering, through sacred sexuality. If you want to know more about that, I'm going to share it with you quite candidly in the next post on sacred sexuality, what it is and how to get it. I hope you'll join me.